crew. This is the Voices of Titanic podcast, episode 5, and I am your host, Sam. Thank you so much for joining me today. As I mentioned during episode 4, I wanted to release another episode this weekend. I was really taken by the stories of the last men that were discovered after the disaster. Interestingly enough, they were both named William, and similar to William Thomas Curley, this young man seems to be remembered for his death and the fact that he was the very last body to be recovered. I want to give him a voice and share his life story. Again, I can't reiterate this enough, but I think we are all so much more than our tragedies and our traumas, and these victims should be given the same respect. The man I'm going to tell you about today was named William Frederick Cheverton. William was born September 3rd, 1884, in Newport, Isle of Wight of Hampshire County in England. A little bit about Newport. It is located in southern England. It has a warm and mild climate, and it is considered one of the sunniest places in the British Isles. The first reference recorded was in the year 1180. The town was founded by the first Earl of Devon and the Lord of the Isle of Wight. In 1608, the town was incorporated as a borough, and the position of Newport made trade easily acceptable to the sea, making it the Isle of Wight's central hub. Also, the town of Newport was never walled, so it has no actual physical boundaries. I thought that was a pretty neat fact. William Frederick Cheverton was baptized on October 21st, 1884 at St. John in Carisbrooke, England. His parents were William and Emma Cheverton. William's father was also from Newport and worked as a foreman in a brewery. In 1891, the census indicated he had 8 siblings and that the family lived at Anchor Brewery on Mill Street in Carisbrooke. At the age of 16, he and his family still lived on Mill Street, but William was now listed as a painter. He also had a new younger sister named Dorothy. A year later, on July 21st, 1902, William enlisted in the Royal Navy. His service log records him as being 5'3", with brown hair, blue eyes, and a fresh complexion. It also states that he had tattoos on his left forearm. William has quite an extensive ship resume. It's really impressive. In his 6 years of service, working on ships such as the Duke of Wellington, the Leviathan, History 1, Sapphire 2, Victory 1 and 2, the HMS Edgar, and the Renown. His record shows that he was a domestic worker, both in third and second class. I believe this is a Royal Navy equivalent to a ship steward, and anyone can correct me if I'm wrong on that. It also looks like he may have been an officer's steward in second class near the end of his career as well. I'll post a picture of the record on Instagram. I'd love to hear any thoughts on it. It's really fascinating and fun to look at. On February 26, 1908, at 23 years old, William completed his time in the Royal Navy. Now, there is a gap of information missing between 1908 and 1911 until he shows up again in the 1911 census. It states in 1911 that he is a visitor at 2 Oxford Street in Southampton. It's possibly a boarding house or a hotel. There are several other gentlemen staying there, including a future fellow Titanic steward named George Herbert Hinckley. As a Titanic enthusiast, it's really neat to look at this document too. I'll also share a screenshot of this as well. You can see he and Hinckley are both listed as ship stewards. When you look at William's information when he signed on to the Titanic, it shows that he had previously worked on Titanic's sister, the Olympic. And since the Olympic was launched in 1910 and he was listed as a ship steward in 1911, I'm wondering if he'd been working on her since her launch. That would be really neat if it were true. On April 4th, 1912, he signed on as a first-class saloon steward on RMS Titanic. He was expected to board at 6 a.m. on April 10th, 1912 in Southampton. His wages were listed as £3 and 15 shillings. Like William Thomas Curley, William Frederick Cheverton's experience on Titanic, as well as his final moments, are unknown, but what we do know is this. On June 8, 1912, the British steamship Ilford was traveling to Hamburg, Germany from Galveston, Texas. At latitude 49.06 north, longitude 42.51 west, William's body was found. W.F. Bassett, the chief officer of the Ilford, was on the bridge at the time. At 8 o'clock that morning, he saw a strange object floating in the water. Using his glasses to see this object better, he was able to determine that it was in fact a human body. He signaled to the engineer to stop the ship, and a lifeboat was lowered down. They saw the life jacket attached to William's body, and he was taken on board the vessel. It stated that a watch was found with his initials engraved on it, as well as other personal effects, but they don't list what these were specifically. His official papers were also found in his pocket, although soaked with water. They were able to ascertain his identity from these. Another newspaper article adds that in addition to the papers, there were, quote, curious trinkets and jewels. Sadly, again, there are no specifics on these items. The papers and valuables were stored in the ship's safe, and William's body was buried at sea due to the state of his body and because there were, unfortunately, no provisions for transporting his body to land. Absolutely heartbreaking. The papers discovered on the body were then turned over to the British consulate after the ship arrived in Hamburg. William Frederick Cheverton was only 27 years old. To make matters worse, William's family could not grieve in peace. On August 1st, 1912, the Portsmouth Evening News reported that William's family's case for compensation was in court. A Mr. C.F. Hiscock was brought forth before the judge and said that the registrar, a man named Mr. Dashwood, had refused to record the agreement for £54 as he thought it was inadequate. The registrar stated that William's mother, Emma, was receiving approximately £18 a year from her son in support of his crippled sister, who was age 29 at the time. The registrar believed that the amount the Oceanic Steam Navigation Company offered was based on a practice that he could find no legal authority for and that which had been adopted elsewhere. He also added that the only limitation was £300. This practice, according to the registrar, was based on the calculations of 3 years' payment of £18 per year made by the deceased. He also stated that William's sister was only a partial dependent since his father was earning 30 shillings a week to support the home. So then the question becomes, how much money should a partial dependent receive? The judge ultimately agreed and declared that it was his decision to decide what was a reasonable and proportionate award to the loss sustained, and that the amount originally declared was insufficient, and his honor decided that there should be further inquiry. Fast forward to March 13th, 1913, the Isle of Wight Times reports that the case was back in court. The Court of Appeals referred the case back to the judge from the 1912 hearing, a man named Judge Guy, on the grounds that the financial award did not explicitly state whether William's sister was a total or partial dependent. Sometime between August of 1912 and March of 1913, the judge had actually awarded £300 in William's sister's favor. Here is an excerpt from the paper. It says here, quote, "It appeared that the late Mr. Cheverton was a steward on the Titanic and sent out an average of 80 shillings a month to his mother for the support of his crippled sister, the applicant, which was contended was sufficient to keep her, and his honor made an award of £300 in her favor, against which the respondents appealed. His honor said it was distressing having these cases sent back. Mr. Dracrier, who represented the family, said, I regard it as a shameful waste of money. His honor said the award was for the full amount, whether the applicant was wholly or partially dependent, and what was the good of arguing a case in which he had already made up his mind. The only thing he had not done was to put down in technical and mathematical language what the finding was. Mr. Dracrier said he must have a definite finding, otherwise there might be some danger of the case being sent back again. After the evidence which had been previously given had been called, Mr. Hiscock contended that the respondents were quite justified in appealing, as in the first instance the mother claimed to be a dependent, but that claim was withdrawn, otherwise that of the daughters would have been hopeless. If the applicant was only partially dependent, as he submitted, then it was monstrous to award £300. The White Star Line were prepared to meet their liabilities, but they were not philanthropists and felt it their duty to contest this claim on the grounds that it was excessive. His honor said he would take time to consider his decision. And sadly, I cannot find anything after this. I have no clue if the Cheverton family received this amount or if the judge changed his mind and they received a smaller sum. I looked through a lot of old newspapers and had no luck. If anyone knows of the case's outcome, please feel free to share. It's really disheartening that the victims' families had to go through legal trouble like this when they should have been able to grieve and process their loss. But I have to remind myself that these were big companies with huge interests. As I mentioned back in episode 1, JP Morgan's company owned White Star Line, and he was one of the world's most successful businessmen. As we know, the wealthy will always protect their assets first. On a bittersweet note, I want to focus on the fact that William was taking care of his older sister. I believe this may have been Ellen Cheverton by looking at the census records. She was reportedly his favorite sister, and he promised to take care of her for the rest of his life. I wasn't able to find any details on her condition, but the fact that he would put money aside for her care is such an admirable and beautiful act of love. I can't imagine how she must have felt when he passed. I can only fathom that it was absolutely devastating. She passed away in 1970 at the age of 88, and I'm glad that she was able to live such a long life despite her struggles. Another article from the Isle of Wight Times on April 25th, 1912 says that William was to be married shortly. I'm not sure who this woman was, but again, I think it's important that we not only remember the lives of the people who perished, but also the impact that the Titanic had. It wasn't just the world that was affected with this sensational news story, but a personal tragedy to thousands of family members, friends, and partners or future spouses. Like the ripple effect when dropping a pebble into a pond. The effects of that one night continued on for many, many individuals for decades. William had so many years ahead of him, and he was robbed of his potential, just like William Thomas Curley. He had a big family, he was engaged, and he worked hard his whole life. He dedicated 6 years of his life to service. Let's remember these things, the beautiful parts that make up a person, their lives, and their contributions to the world. Let's pause and have a moment of silence for William Frederick Cheverton. Let us honor him and the hundreds of lives that were lost with him. Thank you, crew, for joining me in today's episode. As we disembark, I wish you happiness, love, and peace. Take care, and I'll see you next time on the Voices of Titanic.